There's no other place like Louisiana. A vast landscape of water and light. Home to the delta of the big, muddy Mississippi. And the capital of jazz. A city of great celebration and terrifying devastation. Where entire city blocks have been wiped off the map. And dark forces inspired the best-selling chronicles of a vampire. Area Louisiana explores the stark contradictions of this southern state. It's a nature lover's paradise, where the state bird has made a surprising comeback. But also a place where giant industry is leaving lasting scars. It was from here that a spicy sauce ventured out to conquer the globe. And where battles of the Civil War have not been forgotten. With a 1,000,000-acre marsh that's disappearing at amazing speed, and giant walls of steel engineered to hold back the next great surge. This is Louisiana. It would be hard to imagine Louisiana without its sparkling, pulsating soul, New Orleans. It's a mecca for the culturally curious, a melting pot of sounds and flavors. It was here where Chef Emeril Lagasse, inspired by local Creole and Cajun spices, launched his food empire. And where a one-time bootlegger named Pat O'Brien disguised the taste of cheap rum with fruit juice and sugar to create New Orleans' famous hurricane drink. Still served right here at O'Brien's popular Courtyard Bar. But this city isn't just a place to party. It also has a dark edge, even in daylight. And hurricanes aren't the only threat. New Orleans has one of the highest murder rates in America and a colorful history of criminal enterprise. One of the first American mafia families got their start on the city's waterfront, extracting protection money from dock workers and other laborers. But there's a unique twist on just about everything in New Orleans. Around the time that trumpeter Louis Armstrong was getting his start playing on riverboats like this one, a serial killer called the Axeman is said to have vowed that he would spare potential victims if he found them listening to jazz. Even burying the dead here is unconventional. This is St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. With half of the city below sea level, underground cemeteries aren't an option. In the 1700s, French settlers started burying their dead in tombs like these, a practice that's still carried on today. It's almost a city of its own, with multi-story crypts, some designed to hold entire families. Many illustrious names have been laid to rest here, including Marie Laveau, a Creole hairdresser whose uncanny powers of divination earned her the title Queen of Voodoo. No one has captured New Orleans' dark undercurrents better than author Anne Rice in her best-selling Vampire Chronicles. Rice grew up in this city and later lived here in this 47,000-square-foot Italianate mansion on Napoleon Street. It was originally built in 1865 as a boarding school. It's one of the many grand Victorian homes that comprise the Garden District. Rice has captured the sweetness of this city just as well as she has its dark edge. I returned to New Orleans, and as soon as I smelled the air, I knew I was home. one of her characters says. The scent of jasmine and roses. I walk the streets, savoring that long-lost perfume. One reason so many different people have called New Orleans home over the centuries is that this city has welcomed just about anyone. Even before the Civil War, a community of freed African slaves thrived here, in this neighborhood called Treme. It's home to St. Augustine Catholic Church. Built in 1842 by free people of color, it opened its doors to blacks and whites, who each raced to buy pews in the church for their own communities. In the end, the famous War of the Pews was won by blacks who purchased 3 for every 1 bought by whites, and designated many of their seats for the use of slaves, making St. Augustine the most integrated congregation in the country. Jazz great Louis Armstrong was born in New Orleans in 1901. He was the grandson of African slaves. His legacy is honored at Armstrong Park, next to the very site where the city's early jazz fests were held, Congo Square. It was in this square that West African slaves once gathered to play music and dance. Whether here in Treme or down in the French Quarter, New Orleans is nothing if not a reflection of America itself, a rich blend of cultures and traditions. But just outside the city limits begins a very different world. From New Orleans all the way to the Texas border and south to the Gulf of Mexico lies a remarkable landscape. Millions of acres of watery marshes, deltas, and swamps. They're home to flocks of white egrets and wet forests of bald cypress. These unique trees have resin in their trunks that enables them to fend off rot and thrive in water. This is one of the richest ecosystems on the planet, the prowling ground of North America's largest reptile. There are an estimated 2 million American alligators in this state. The largest one ever recorded here was more than 19 feet long. Southern Louisiana may be a natural paradise, but that's just part of the story. Underneath this multi-million acre marsh is a vast hidden infrastructure that keeps America running. 68,000 miles of invisible pipeline, moving oil and natural gas to and from drilling rigs, ships, pumping stations, and refineries. Sometimes they rise above the surface. This giant storage facility is part of the Loop, short for Louisiana Offshore Oil Port. It lies in the middle of the marsh, more than 20 miles from the Gulf of Mexico. The Loop is the largest point of entry for foreign oil in the U.S. Each day, 1.4 million barrels of crude from supertankers offshore are pumped through here to the country's refineries. From here, pipelines fan out like veins across southern Louisiana, underground and underwater. It's possible to travel right across them and never know they're there. But not all of Louisiana's oil infrastructure is hidden from view. South of the Loop's storage facility lies Port Fourchon, at the very southern tip of the state. There are no permanent residents here, but it is a critical nerve center of the oil industry. Louisiana's underwater oil fields were first tapped in the 1940s. Today, there are 3,500 drilling platforms in the Gulf of Mexico, employing 55,000 workers. Keeping these men and machines working 24/7 requires a giant repair shop. And that's the role of Port Fourchon. Drilling platforms are the tallest offshore structures in the world, but even they need an occasional overhaul. High up on this 30-year-old rig called the Hercules 204, a crew repairs a helipad. Nets along the edge help keep the men safe. An average of 7 rig workers die in the Gulf of Mexico each year. Hundreds more are injured. The recent blowout of a drilling rig known as the Deepwater Horizon killed 11 men in a single day. But Port Fourchon is much more than a repair facility. It's also a giant distribution hub. An estimated 270 support vessels steam into and out of the port each day, around the clock, hauling the food, water, fuel, and heavy equipment necessary to keep the Gulf's drilling rigs and crews working. Louisiana's oil industry accounts for 16% of the state's GDP. And that wouldn't be possible without some of the largest private air fleets in the world. Every day, Gulf helicopter pilots log 2,000 flights to carry 10,000 oil workers to and from offshore rigs. That's as much air traffic as there is at New York City's 3 airports combined. Oil rig crews typically work in 2-week shifts, commuting by helicopter twice a month. This one is ferrying a specialized diver out to make repairs. Without helicopters, crossing this coastal area can be a challenge, especially by car. When there's not enough solid land for roads, the only option is to build over the swamp. Before new causeways are completed, they can look like roads to nowhere. But there is one very fast way to speed across this marsh: airboat. These flat-bottomed vessels are so prevalent here, they've become symbols of Louisiana. Powered by aircraft engines, their noise can be deafening. With a tidal shoreline of nearly 8,000 miles, it's easy to get lost. These twisting inlets have confused ship pilots for centuries. And Louisiana's first settlers were no exception. French explorers first discovered the Louisiana coast after traveling down the Mississippi from the Great Lakes in 1682. They claimed and named the area Louisiana after their king, Louis XIV. Soon after, France sent settlers to start a colony. They searched, but couldn't find the mouth of the Mississippi in this enormous patchwork of land and water. So they headed on and settled in what's now Texas instead. But on Mardi Gras Day, 1699, a second group of French settlers finally located the mouth of the Great River. These days, GPS guides 6,000 ocean vessels a year from around the world right into the mouth of the Mississippi. A single bulk carrier like this one can be loaded with more than 100,000 cubic meters of grain, which will be exported to countries like Egypt and China. This port at New Orleans is part of the biggest grain and soybean export hub in the U.S. today. In the early 19th century, cotton and sugar were Louisiana's top crops. They were grown here on plantations that lined Louisiana's famous River Road, which follows the Mississippi from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. When it was constructed in 1839, the Oak Alley Mansion was set at the end of a double row of 28 oak trees, leading from the river to the house. Today, this avenue of great trees is popular with tourists. And Hollywood, Interview with a Vampire, and Primary Colors were both filmed here. It's not planting season yet, but sugarcane continues to be grown in great quantities along River Road today. In the early 1800s, almost half the sugar consumed in the U.S. was Louisiana sugar. This vast estate, known as Evergreen, was built on sugarcane profits. With 37 carefully preserved buildings, it's considered one of the most intact plantations in the South. In the early 19th century, the estate's owner, Pierre Becnel, spent so much money remodeling his family home that he went bankrupt and had to sell the place. But with sugar so profitable, Becnel was soon able to buy back the estate and the plantation's slaves. They lived here, in these simple cabins. Great profits from sugar would not have been possible without slave labor. It was back-breaking work. And in 1811, slaves in this parish rose up, the largest slave revolt ever to take place in the U.S. Some 500 slaves marched downriver towards New Orleans, but were quickly attacked by a militia of planters. Many of the slaves fled into nearby swamps. Most were shot, and others were hanged. In Louisiana, the Civil War battles that brought an end to slavery are still being relived today. Smoke from cannon fire rises over Port Hudson. In May 1863, while Major General Ulysses S. Grant was attacking Vicksburg, more Union forces gathered here, hoping to seize control of one of the last Confederate strongholds on the Mississippi River. The little-known Battle of Port Hudson was an important turning point in the Civil War. Every year, 500 men and women gather here from across the South. They are passionate reenactors who live in period tents before the battle begins. Most are Louisiana natives, some even descendants of the Confederate soldiers who survived the siege. On May 23rd, more than 30,000 Union troops arrived to take the fort. Those in red uniforms were from an elite fighting unit called the Zouaves, the Green Berets of the day. Despite being outnumbered, the Confederates fought hard. For a captivated crowd, these reenactors tried their best to capture each important turn of the siege. Each authentic cannon can cost tens of thousands of dollars. Each uniform runs into the hundreds. Over just one weekend, they play out, step by step, a battle that lasted more than 6 weeks. Once the Union troops cut off supplies, Port Hudson's defenders ran out of food and were forced to eat their own horses and even rats to survive. On July 9, 1863, after hearing of the fall of Vicksburg, those who were left finally laid down their arms and surrendered. But by then, both sides had suffered huge casualties, with thousands dead or wounded. Just south of the battlefield lies the Port Hudson National Cemetery, containing the graves of nearly 4,000 Union soldiers. The Confederate dead weren't buried here in tidy rows. Their bodies were left in the trenches where they fell. The victory at Port Hudson finally gave the Union forces control of the entire Mississippi. But the Civil War wasn't the first time that battles had been waged to control traffic and trade on this river. Arriving in New Orleans, the Harvest Legend, a 45,000-ton bulk carrier, prepares to make a 135-degree turn against the current. Before these giant ships even enter the mouth of the Mississippi, they're required to have a licensed local river pilot on board to guide them upriver. These pilots know best how to navigate the Mississippi's every twist and turn, especially this one at Algiers Point. The powerful currents that race around this sharp bend, just feet from the city, make Algiers Point the most treacherous spot on the river for big ships. It was here in 1996 where the Liberian-registered MV Brightfield, fully loaded with grain, lost engine power and slammed into New Orleans' Riverwalk Marketplace, 62 people were injured. Over millennia, the Mississippi has flowed past Algiers Point, depositing sediment on the opposite bank and building up a natural levee shaped like a crescent, inspiring New Orleans' nickname, Crescent City. The city's strategic location allowed it to control all river traffic and trade heading up and down the Mississippi. But it wasn't just France and the U.S. that fought to own this lucrative gateway. The French may have founded New Orleans in 1718, but they later ceded it to Spain. Working for the Spanish, French architect Don Gilberto Guimard designed the St. Louis Cathedral, the oldest cathedral in the U.S. and a New Orleans landmark. On the left side of the St. Louis stands the Cabildo, or Council, Spain's former seat of government. In 1803, the Spanish returned New Orleans back to France. And 20 days later, France turned around and sold all of the Louisiana territory to the U.S. for $15 million. On December 20th, 1803, the famous Louisiana Purchase was made official inside the Cabildo. But the struggle for this city wasn't quite over yet. America might have lost its new territory if it wasn't for this man, General Andrew Jackson. Before becoming president, he was known as the hero of New Orleans. Nearly 40 years after American independence, Britain sent troops to try and wrestle New Orleans out of the hands of the United States. 4 miles southeast of the city, ships passed by the site called Chalmette, where Jackson assembled a ragtag army of a few thousand militia, Haitian slaves, pirates, and settlers. Cannons still line the battleground. On January 8, 1815, Jackson's army was ready to defend the city against 8,000 British troops. The Battle of New Orleans lasted just a few hours. When the smoke cleared, 2,000 British soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing, while Jackson and his men escaped with less than 100 casualties and full control of the city. This marble obelisk was completed in 1908 to mark the site of the last conflict fought on the U.S. mainland against a foreign nation. Jackson has been a hero in this town ever since. Much has changed along the banks of the Mississippi River since the days of steamboats and slavery. Vast fields of cotton and sugarcane have been replaced with new industries and futuristic-looking landscapes like this one. This red lake is what's known as a tailings pond. At first, it looks like southern red clay, but it's actually bauxite, a toxic byproduct of making rolled aluminum foil. This pond contains 120 million cubic yards of it, more than the earth that was removed to build the Suez Canal. The best way to grasp the size of these enormous facilities is to see them from the air. This one is a holding tank for phosphogypsum, the byproduct of a nearby fertilizer plant. These facilities lie in a vast industrial corridor known as Cancer Alley. It stretches 85 miles, from New Orleans to Baton Rouge, and is home to more than 130 industrial plants. Cancer rates in Louisiana are some of the highest in the nation. Some scientists say that's due largely to releases of toxic materials from industries along this stretch of river. The biggest plant of them all is this one, just north of Baton Rouge, the second largest oil refinery in America. The ExxonMobil facility was built in 1909 on 225 acres of cotton fields. From an array of holding tanks, 500,000 barrels of crude a day travel through pipelines into these distillation columns. Inside these superheated towers, oil separates into different components, which are then streamed to the production of an incredible range of products: gas, jet fuel, milk cartons, diapers, and lubricant. These white clouds are just water vapor. But below are black lagoons filled with toxic wastewater, a byproduct of refining crude. Aerators pump oxygen into the ponds to feed natural microbes that help neutralize the sludge. But millions of pounds of chemicals from this refinery still make it into the surrounding environment each year. What makes this refinery unique is that it's just a stone's throw from the Louisiana State House. Legislators look out over their biggest taxpayer. ExxonMobil alone pays $100 million a year into Louisiana's coffers. Baton Rouge has been the state capital since 1849. Its first state house still stands on a bluff overlooking the Mississippi. Mark Twain frequently passed this spot as a ship captain in the 1850s and called the building and its medieval facade a monstrosity. In 1930, Louisiana's Governor Huey P. Long, also known as the Kingfish, decided that Louisiana needed a more impressive state house. The charismatic Long got the project funded right in the middle of the Great Depression. Finished in 29 months, this Art Deco-style skyscraper rises 450 feet, making it the tallest state capitol in the U.S. The grand staircase at its entrance features 50 steps, one for every state in the Union. The Capitol building was just one of many ambitious projects Long undertook as governor. Tackling the state's antiquated infrastructure, he ordered the construction of nearly 16,000 miles of roads and highways. And he built more than 100 bridges, including the Huey P. Long Bridge that crosses the Mississippi at Baton Rouge. Its mile-long span sits just over 100 feet above the water, not quite high enough for giant freighters to pass underneath. Legend has it that Long did that on purpose to keep larger ships from unloading their cargo further north so that Louisiana could maintain its hold on shipping. Even today, freight heading upriver has to be transferred first onto barges at Baton Rouge. One of Long's greatest legacies was increasing the size of LSU, Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, by doubling the faculty and tripling the number of students. LSU's student body is now close to 30,000. Among its graduates, professional basketball player Shaquille O'Neal, musician Stephen Stills, and former Vice President Hubert Humphrey. Today, it's quiet over Tiger Stadium, but with 92,000 seats for fans, the roar can be deafening. It's a frightening venue for visiting teams, so much so it's nicknamed Death Valley. But Huey P. Long's work was cut short. On the evening of September 8, 1935, inside a corridor of the State House, a man named Carl Weiss, the son-in-law of a political opponent, greeted Long with a pistol and a fatal shot before being gunned down himself by Long's bodyguards. At least that's the official story. Some claim that it was the bodyguards themselves that killed Long and set up Weiss. Huey P. Long is buried here in a park just outside the State House. Had Long's killer lived and been convicted, chances are he would have done time here at Louisiana's most notorious prison, a place known as the Farm. Imagine a prison for violent offenders that's surrounded not by perimeter walls, but by dense forest, river, and swamp. This is Angola, the largest maximum security prison in the United States today. Located on 18,000 acres, it's bigger than the island of Manhattan, and most of it is covered by fields of corn, soybeans, and cotton, which is why Angola is also known as the farm. It was once a pre-Civil War plantation, named for the African country where many of its slaves were captured and forcibly transported to the U.S. For much of its history, hard physical labor has been used to maintain order at the prison. 40 hours a week, most of Angola's 5,000 convicts toil beneath the Louisiana sun, all under the watchful eye of armed guards on horseback. Another method of control is Camp J, solitary, a place rarely seen by outsiders, especially from above. A few hours a week, prisoners can leave their cells, but must remain alone inside chain-link cages. In an earlier time, getting sent to solitary meant a trip to the infamous Red Hat cell block. It was built in 1933 after Angola's bloodiest escape, led by Charlie Fraser, an outlaw who ran with Pretty Boy Floyd and Bonnie and Clyde. Red Hat's windows have only bars, which made punishment here during the winter particularly harsh. But the toughest place to be at Angola is death row. It's a place that's inspired some of Hollywood's most notorious prison movies: Dead Man Walking, The Green Mile, and Monsters Ball. Until recently, Angola was America's bloodiest prison. In 1995 alone, there were 800 violent attacks among inmates. That's when Warden Burl Cain took over and things began to change. The warden made Christianity a dominating focus. He built new chapels, offers Bible classes, over 400 a month, and plays Christian radio all day long. At a new prison seminary, inmates can even become ministers and are encouraged to preach to other prisoners. Cain says he's just trying to restore hope to a group that has none. With an average sentence length of 92 years, 9 out of 10 prisoners will die here. Another of the warden's programs allows inmates to make their own wooden coffins. When their final day comes, each prisoner is given a dignified funeral procession, with a hand-carved hearse and a cortege of singing prisoners bearing them away. Very few inmates have ever succeeded in escaping from Angola. Dense swamps line one side of the prison, and the Big Muddy circles the other. Not an easy place to make a run for it. But that doesn't stop hunters from building weekend escapes in this swampy land. Living so close to the river comes with tremendous risk. Before the Army Corps of Engineers began trying to control the flow of the river, the Big Muddy routinely flooded its banks each year and has gradually shifted course over time. Sometimes, entire curves of the river are simply lopped off when the water finds a more direct route south. That's what happened here. This bow-shaped body of water used to be a curve in the Mississippi River. But 400 years ago, the river shifted course, cutting off this curve and turning it into a lake. It's now known as False River. Routinely stocked with striped bass, it's a haven for sportsmen. Oxbow lakes aren't the only odd shapes in this watershed. A pattern of strange lines carved into a Louisiana swamp, perfectly visible from the air. They look like the spokes of giant wheels, the markings of an ancient society. In fact, they are 100-year-old scars made by loggers. At the turn of the 20th century, the lack of roads and frequent floods made it hard to extract trees from Louisiana's vast watery forests. So loggers, or swampers as they were called, carved canals through the marsh. Then they'd fan out, cut all the nearby trees and dragged them back to the boats so they could be towed to the mills. These deep dragging scars have never healed. But soon they and vast stretches of southeastern Louisiana could disappear forever. 6,000 years ago, this area was still just seawater. Then, over millennia, the mud and sediment that flowed out of the Mississippi River gradually built up a vast stretch of land, reaching into the Gulf of Mexico. But while the Mississippi may have created southeastern Louisiana naturally over thousands of years, human intervention is now causing it to disappear at a terrifying speed. Over the past 80 years, the state has lost nearly 2,000 square miles of shoreline to erosion, an area equivalent in size to the state of Delaware. Deltas erode naturally from storms and tidal forces. But man-made shipping channels like this one speed up that rate of erosion. Fast-flowing water pulls mud and sediment right out into the Gulf of Mexico. That's why the government is working to trap sediment before it disappears. At the end of this long, wide shipping channel, environmental engineers have constructed a series of narrow islands that fan out from the mouth of the channel. From the air, they look like branches of a tree. It's a project known as the Jaws. These islands should grow over time as they trap sediment flowing out of the mouth of the channel. This project alone is expected to create 2,000 acres of new land. And it's just one of many anti-erosion projects along Louisiana's coast. If they're not successful, scientists believe that by 2050, 700 more square miles of delta could disappear, leaving the open ocean at New Orleans' doorstep. In the 18th century, freedom-seeking refugees from Acadia, or what's now Canada, arrived in these coastal bayous. Their descendants, known as Cajuns, are famous for their unique blend of peppery spices. And Louisiana's Avery Island is home to one spicy sauce that's conquered the globe. In this brick factory, the McElhaney family runs a $100 million a year business, turning chili peppers, salt, and other seasonings into Tabasco sauce. But the McElhaneys didn't come to Avery Island for chilies. 200 years ago, they came here to raise sugarcane, only to discover they were sitting on buried treasure. Their circular island was actually the top of a giant dome of salt. They started harvesting the salt, an operation that's still active today. 1,600 feet underground, miners detonate and collect pure rock salt, and then load it on river barges for shipment up the Mississippi. During the Civil War, Avery Island was a target of the Union Army since salt was used in gunpowder. The McElhaneys fled, and when they returned, they found their salt mines flooded and the sugarcane fields burned. But they noticed that red pepper plants were flourishing. Being something of a gourmet, Edmund McElhaney allowed the peppers to age and ferment so he could make a spicy sauce. In 1868, he sent samples to food distributors in small cologne bottles, hoping his hot pepper condiment was marketable. He called it Tabasco. Now, it's sold in more than 100 countries. These days, most of Tabasco's peppers come from Mexico, but every bottle of the sauce is still filled at this factory on Avery Island. And there's more to this place than salt and pepper. By 1892, Edward Avery McElhaney, the son of Tabasco's founder, was concerned that the high demand for feathered women's hats was driving Louisiana's snowy egret to extinction. He waded into the swamp, caught 8 young egrets, and raised them himself in a rookery next to his house. It was Louisiana's first wildlife preserve. Today, it's called Bird City, a nesting spot for 20,000 birds, including snowy and great egrets, blue herons, wood ducks, and geese. Back in the early 19th century, it was Louisiana's birds that first inspired one of America's most famous naturalists. In 1821, 36 years old at the time, John James Audubon arrived here at Oakley Plantation to tutor Miss Eliza Peary, the daughter of Oakley's owners. The plantation's distinctive porches were designed in a West Indies style, with elaborate jalousies to keep them cool in Louisiana's hot summer. Audubon spent only 4 months here, but was inspired by the estate's magnolia trees and the many warblers and thrushes that flew among their branches. It was on his afternoon strolls through these grounds that he began painting portraits of birds. When he left, he carried with him 32 drawings he'd made, the start of a career that would make him America's best-known painter of birds and other wildlife and inspire the creation of the Audubon Society. Birds have thrived in Louisiana's coastal wetlands for millennia. But today, this ecosystem is threatened, and with it, Louisiana's state bird, the brown pelican. These plunge-diving, fish-eating birds used to be in great abundance along the state's coastal marshes. But in 1963, there wasn't a single one left. Pelicans had become a victim of the chemical pesticide DDT. State biologists swung into action, relocating 50 young pelicans here from Florida and repeating the introductions for 12 years. Today, the brown pelican is off the endangered species list. They're breeding on their own, up and down the islands along the coast. But there are now new threats to Louisiana's birds and other wildlife. Every year, millions of gallons of oil are released off Louisiana's Gulf Coast. The recent explosion of the Deepwater Horizon alone released a total of 185 million gallons. Waves of crude hit the Pelican and Spoonbill rookeries. Tar balls washed up on the beach. Cleanup crews search for and remove oil deposits along Grand Isle. Thanks to their efforts, the Louisiana coast is bouncing back after one of the worst oil spills on record here. Resiliency in the face of human and natural disasters is a trademark of Louisiana. And the best place to see it on display is back here in New Orleans. From the air, sparkling lights stretch as far as the eye can see. But on the night of August 29, 2005, there wasn't a single bulb burning. The city's electric grid had been knocked out, and a hurricane threatened to wipe New Orleans off the map. In a Louisiana field stand reminders of the vulnerability of this state to natural disaster. These are just a few hundred of the remaining FEMA trailers that were sent to house temporarily the thousands of residents who fled their homes after one of the most destructive hurricanes that ever hit the United States. 92,000 of these trailers were distributed after Hurricane Katrina. Now empty, those in this field will soon be auctioned off. By August 2005, there was no city in America as vulnerable as New Orleans. It was literally surrounded by water, but without adequate barriers to keep that water out in the event of catastrophe. To the north, the vast Lake Pontchartrain, a giant body of salt water crossed by the second longest causeway in the world. On all other sides, the Big Muddy Mississippi. Water has even been known to bubble up under city streets. Many of them lie below sea level. From above, sights that became headline news in August 2005 after Katrina came ashore appear amazingly unchanged by the storm. The iconic Superdome now stands on dry ground and once again hosts home games of the New Orleans Saints and concerts of major entertainers. But in 2005, 30,000 Katrina survivors, with nowhere else to turn, flooded into the dome, seeking a refuge of last resort. Commuters have returned to the Crescent City connection. It was across this bridge that hundreds fled on foot after the storm subsided, hoping finally to get out of town, but they were quickly turned back by a wall of armed policemen. Many claimed it was an act of racism and that the police were only trying to keep New Orleans' African-American evacuees out of one of the city's primarily white suburbs. But not everything here has returned to normal. In the neighborhoods of the 9th Ward, evidence of Katrina's terrifying force remains clearly visible. Foundations still lie bare after 20 feet of hurricane floodwater surged from the Gulf, leaving the entire neighborhood underwater. Many who once lived here have never returned. After Katrina, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers set out to storm-proof the city. They began construction on a 1.8-mile-long crescent-shaped surge barrier across Lake Borgne. Lake Borgne lies east of New Orleans. Within hours after Hurricane Katrina came ashore, a wall of water, primarily from the lake, filled city canals. And then broke through flood walls, rushing into the lower 9th Ward and nearby communities, wiping houses right off their foundations. To try and keep that from happening again, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has been building a flood barrier that spans the lake. It's part of the largest civil works project in the Corps' history. This much concrete hasn't been poured continuously in the United States since the construction of the Hoover Dam in the 1930s. Rising 26 feet above the water, the barrier is built to keep surges from the Gulf of Mexico from reaching New Orleans. South of the city, another giant project is underway. It's much more than just a barrier. If another Katrina-sized storm were to hit, floodwaters would need to be funneled out of the city. That's why the Army Corps has chosen this spot to construct a giant pumping station. The largest drainage pump station in the world. It took more than 3 million man-hours and 18 million pounds of rebar to build. That's as much steel as it takes to build 30 747 airplanes. When the next tropical storm hits, this facility will be able to pump 855,000 gallons of water per second out of the city. These projects are part of a 350-mile-long system of levees and floodgates that the U.S. government hopes will storm-proof New Orleans. Meanwhile, one section of the 9th Ward is bouncing back in typically colorful New Orleans style. These homes were the brainchild of actor Brad Pitt. After visiting this devastated community, he vowed to help. His Make It Right Foundation brought together architects from around the world to design and build dozens of eco-friendly, flood-resistant houses so families from the lower 9th Ward can return home with dignity. Powered by solar energy, no two of these homes are the same. The foundation is also helping rebuild streets and gardens. In a city where music is king, it's not surprising that one of the first and biggest post-Katrina projects was to help displaced musicians. In the upper 9th Ward, natives Harry Connick Jr. and Branford Marcellus, together with Habitat for Humanity, built Musicians Village. More than 70 new houses clustered around a new community center. Since it was built, this artist community has helped raise spirits and hope. and inspired others to return and rebuild in the Ninth Ward and other hard-hit neighborhoods. Musicians in New Orleans are leading the charge. From the creatures that soar over its marshes, to the men and women who drive its economy. These are the passionate souls that keep Louisiana's spirit alive.